There are two ways of creating animations in CSS: transitions and animations. Transitions wait until a change in a property occurs and then allows those changes to take place over time. Without a transition, any changes in a property would take effect immediately. Transitions should be used when properties are changed interactively. So for example, in CSS, a property can change when hovered on and when focused on. Animations, however, provide keyframes for more control over the animation and allows us to create complex animations on a frame-by-frame basis. Use animations when you want to create complex animations that just work without having to wait for properties that change interactively. You can also create stunning animations by combining both transitions and animations together. In this example, I used transitions to make boxes appear when hovering over the orbs, and I used animations to make the rings rotate in a circle. I also used some JavaScript to track the position of the mouse and move the rings towards the mouse, creating a tunnel-like effect. This example barely scratches the surface of what's possible with animations, and in this video, I'm going to provide you with all the fundamental CSS animation concepts you need to know to start getting creative and building beautiful CSS animations for your own projects. To create a transition, we first need a component that has a change in property. In my HTML, I have a button with the class of button. In my CSS, I have the styles for the button, and I also have a hover state. All this does is moves our button 10 pixels up when we hover over it. We see this is exactly what's happening, but it's taking effect immediately. This is not how things move in the real world. We can make the hover state happen over time by using the transition properties. Transition property, transition duration, transition timing function, and transition delay. The transition property defines which property the transition effect should be applied to. In our hover state, we are only using the transform property, so in here we can say transform. The transition duration defines how long the transition effect should take to complete. I'm going to set it to 0.3 seconds. The transition timing function defines the acceleration curve for the transition. The common possible values that go in here are ease in, ease out, ease in out, linear, and ease, which is the default. The transition delay defines the delay before the transition should take effect. I want my transition to start the moment the element is hovered on, so I set this one to 0 seconds. When we hover over our button, we see the button moves 10 pixels up over time, and this is a lot better than before, but in our code, what we can do is instead of using these 4 properties, we can use the shorthand property transition. In the transition property, we can set the same values that we passed in our 4 properties and also in the same order. So transform, 0.3 seconds, ease, and 0 seconds delay. Hovering over our button, we see this works great, but we can shorten our code even more. If we have a delay of 0 seconds, then we can remove it entirely. Also, ease is the default timing function, so we can remove it as well. Now when we hover over our button, we see it's still working perfectly. Sometimes you might have more than one property changing. For example, maybe on hover, I want the background color to match the border color. And also maybe I want the color of the text to be white. When I hover over my button, the only property that has a transition effect is the transform. So what I can do is inside my transition property, I can comma separate the different properties I want animated. The background color property with a 0.3 second duration and the color property with a 0.3 second duration as well. Now, when I hover over my button, everything is being animated, but back in our code, if I had more than 3 properties on our hover state, comma separating each property would take a lot of time, especially if they shared the same duration, timing function, and delay. In those cases, what we can do instead is have nothing being comma separated, and on the first value, instead of defining a property, we can replace it with the all keyword. Now everything is going to have a transition effect applied to it. To create an animation, we first need an element that we want to animate. In my HTML, I have an h1 element with the class of heading1. To animate this heading, I can head over to my CSS file and add a keyframe. The syntax for this is @keyframes and curly braces. In between the @keyframes and curly braces goes the name of our animation. I'm going to call it slide in left. Inside the curly braces goes the animation. I want my heading to be positioned on the left side of the screen and then slide into its original position. To do this, I need to define the rules from the beginning of the animation to the end of the animation. Inside the curly braces, I can add the values from and to. From represents the beginning of the animation, or 0% completed, and the to represents the end of the animation, or 100% completed. They both have curly braces. I want the animation to start 300 pixels to the left, so inside the from curly braces, I can add a transform of translate x minus 300 pixels. Then, inside the to curly braces, I can add a transform of translate x and set it to 0. I set this one to 0 because a translate x of 0 will bring the element back to its original position. Looking at our heading, we see nothing is happening. This is because we didn't tell our heading to animate. I can select our heading by its class name, and in here go 7 animation properties. Animation name, animation duration, animation timing function, animation delay, animation iteration count, animation direction, and animation fill mode. The animation name property is for selecting the keyframe you want to use to animate the element. We created a keyframe called slide in left, so in the animation name property as a value, I will pass it slide in left. After setting the animation name property, we see our heading is still not animating. This is because we need to set the animation duration. The animation duration property sets the time it takes for the animation to complete one lap. When you create a keyframe animation, you're defining the rules of the animation from 0% to 100%. This property defines how long it takes to animate from 0% to 100%. The default is 0 seconds, but if I leave it at 0 seconds, our animation will never run. So I'll set it to 1 second. Now we see our heading is being animated. The animation timing function property defines the acceleration curve for the animation. The default is ease, but we have the same options as before: ease, ease in, ease out, ease in out, and linear. I'll set mine to ease in. The animation delay property sets a delay before running the animation. The default is 0 seconds, and this means the animation will run right away on page load. I will leave it at the default is 0 seconds for now. The animation iteration count property defines how many times you want the animation to run. The default is 1, and this means the animation will complete 1 lap and then stop animating. If I set it to 2 or more, then the animation will run 2 or more times. I can also set it to infinite, and this will make the animation run forever. I will leave it at the default value of 1. The animation direction property defines whether the animation will run normally or in reverse. The default is normal, but if I set it to reverse, all this will do is start the animation from the last keyframe and end it on the first keyframe. I will leave it at the default value of normal. And lastly, the animation fill mode property defines how the animation will apply the styles from our keyframe before and after its execution. This is hard to understand without some visuals, so I'll give it the default value of none. I'll add a transform to our heading of translate x minus 150 pixels, and I'll add an animation delay of 1 second. The beginning position of our animation is still 300 pixels to the left, and the ending position of our animation is still in the middle of the page. Our heading, however, now has a transform x of minus 150 pixels. This didn't change the original position of our heading. Our original position is still in the middle of the page. However, the transform that we added in the heading will push the heading 150 pixels to the left before the animation starts and after the animation ends. We can see this when we look at our heading. It's 150 pixels to the left, and after a 1 second delay, the animation starts, and then when the animation is over, the heading gets pushed back 150 pixels to the left. We can use the animation fill mode property to change this behavior. If I set it to forwards, although the heading starts 150 pixels to the left, when the animation ends, instead of pushing the heading back 150 pixels to the left like before, we see now the heading stays in the middle. And this is because forwards will apply the styles from the last keyframe to our heading when the animation ends. If I set it to backwards, the heading will start with the styles that are defined in the first keyframe, but when the animation ends,